Good afternoon, one and all. Today we are going to continue a topic of disease of uveal tract, and today we are going to deal with uveitis. So, at the end of the session, today you'll be able to understand the basics of uveitis and know the various types of uveitis and know the causes of defective vision in uveitis and how we can manage a case of uveitis. So, first, what is uveitis? Anywhere, itis means inflammation. So, here there is inflammation of the uveal tissue. Along with the uveal tissue, there is inflammation of the associated structures like cornea, sclera, retina, and vitreous. So this inflammatory process can involve the adjacent structures also. We can classify uveitis into 4 different classifications as anatomical classification, clinical classification, pathological classification, and etiological classification. We'll first deal with anatomical classification. So anatomical classification, it depends upon the primary site of the inflammation. So that is if the anterior part of the uvea is inflamed. So what are the anterior structures in uvea? Iris and pars plicata part of ciliary body. So the main site of the inflammation will be iritis and cyclitis. So these two come under anterior uveitis. And next coming to intermediate uveitis, when the pars plana part of the ciliary body along with the anterior choroid is involved, it is called intermediate uveitis. And posterior uveitis, when both the retina and choroid are involved, it is called posterior uveitis. And what is panuveitis? It is the whole uveal tissue from anterior iris to the posterior choroid. When it gets involved, it is called panuveitis. Generally, there is associated inflammation of the vitreous, retina, and anterior chamber as well. So next coming to clinical classification. Clinically, we can classify uveitis into 3 types: acute, chronic, and recurrent uveitis. So acute uveitis has a sudden and symptomatic onset and it persists for 6 weeks or less period of time. And next coming to chronic uveitis, it has insidious onset and persists for more than 6 weeks. Next coming to recurrent uveitis. Here we see repeated episodes of uveitis which are separated by periods of inactivity which must last for more than 3 months, and in this 3 months period patient should not receive any treatment. So repeated episodes which are separated by more than 3 months of inactivity without treatment is called recurrent uveitis. And next we come to pathological classification. Pathologically, uveitis can be classified into 2 types, suppurative and non-suppurative. Again, Woods has classified non-suppurative uveitis into granulomatous and non-granulomatous uveitis. Coming to etiological classification. Etiologically means based upon the cause of uveitis, the uveitis can be classified into infective, non-infective, and masquerade syndromes. So in infective uveitis, the various causes can be either bacterial, viral, fungal, protozoal, parasitic, and rickettsial. Coming to non-infective. Non-infective, it can be either due to autoimmune reactions or atopy, toxins, trauma, and idiopathy. In masquerade syndromes, it can be due to non-neoplastic syndromes or neoplastic syndromes. Coming to infective uveitis. Here, there is inflammation of the uveal tissue because of invasion of the organisms into the uveal tissue. This invasion can either be exogenous, endogenous, or due to secondary infections. So what does exogenous infection mean? Here, the infective organisms, they gain entry into the iris directly through the anterior chamber from outside. So how can it occur? It occurs during penetrating injuries or due to perforation of the corneal ulcer or following any surgeries like intraocular surgeries like cataract surgery. Secondary infection. Here the secondary infection means the infection spreads from adjacent ocular structures like cornea, conjunctiva, and sclera, or from the lacrimal sac. And endogenous infections. Here the organism gains entrance into the uvea from secondary source, which is present elsewhere in the body. By way of the bloodstream, it gains entrance into the uvea and leads to uveitis. Coming to the pathology of infective uveitis, the infective uveitis can cause both suppurative and non-suppurative type of uveitis. In suppurative uveitis, the main cause is due to invasion of the microorganism into the eye directly following injury. Whereas in non-suppurative uveitis, it can be due to these four mechanisms. So the first mechanism of non-suppurative uveitis is because of hypersensitivity to the microorganism. The microorganism, the primary source of the infection, is present elsewhere in the body. And from this, there can be release of either microbial toxins or microbial particles. These, they gain entrance into the uvea and lead to sensitization of the uveal tissue, which causes production of antibodies. At a later date, when there is again renewal of the infection at the primary source, it leads to antigen-antibody reactions in the uvea, causing uveitis. So, second way of infection is microbial-induced autoimmune reaction. This can occur either by molecular mimicry or by stimulation of innate immunity. So, what is molecular mimicry? It is because of cross-linking of the antigens. That is, the antigens present on the microbes is similar to the self-antigens. So, self-antigens are identified as foreign antigens and there occurs immune reactions leading to uveitis. And there can also be stimulation of innate immunity. This can occur because of microbial toxins like endotoxins and lipid teichoic acid and lipoarabinoamine in tuberculous bacilli. Next, coming to bacterial exotoxins. These are the products which are released from the bacteria and they act as toxins leading to stimulation of the inflammation in the uvea. The various toxins causing uveitis are collagenases, hemolysins, phospholipases and alpha toxins. And next way of mechanism of infective uveitis is microbial cell wall stimulated alternate pathway. So the alternate pathway which leads to inflammation is complement pathway or C-reactive protein and alpha-2 macroglobulin. Next, coming to non-infective uveitis. So what are the various types of non-infective uveitis? As I've already mentioned, it is autoimmune uveitis, atopy, trauma, toxic related uveitis and idiopathic uveitis. So first we'll deal with autoimmune uveitis. Here there are systemic diseases in which one is HLA associated systemic diseases and other one is systemic diseases which do not have any association with HLA. So the HLA associated systemic diseases are, the first and foremost one is ankylosing spondylitis, that is which is expressed with HLA B27, and Reiter syndrome also has HLA B27 association. In Behçet's disease, it has HLA B5 and B51 association. Similarly, VKH, it has HLA DR4 and DR1. Sympathetic ophthalmitis, it is associated with HLA DR4. So the other systemic diseases which cause autoimmune uveitis are collagen disorders like polyarteritis nodosa, disseminated lupus erythematosus and rheumatoid arthritis. And the skin disorders like psoriasis, lichen planus, pemphigus, all these can also lead to uveitis. The various metabolic diseases like diabetes mellitus and gout can also cause uveitis. And the other systemic diseases are anaphylactic uveitis. It can occur as a part of systemic anaphylactic reactions like serum sickness and angioneurotic edema. Or a local reaction like phacoanaphylactic uveitis is also because of autoimmune process. So what is phacoanaphylactic uveitis? Here the lens particles which are leaking from the lens capsule, they act as a foreign body and lead to autoimmune reaction. And next, coming to atopic uveitis. It occurs due to airborne allergens and inhalants like pollens which cause seasonal iritis. A similar reaction is seen in danders of cats chicken feather, and house dust. Next, coming to toxic uveitis. The toxins which are responsible for uveitis can be either endotoxins, exotoxins, or also known as exogenous toxins, and other one is endocular toxins. So what is endotoxins? These are autotoxins or microbial toxins which are produced by the microorganisms which have invaded the body tissues. This is seen in patients with acute pneumococcal or gonococcal conjunctivitis and in patients with fungal corneal ulcer. Coming to endocular toxins. Here the toxins are nothing but the ocular tissues, like the patients with long-standing retinal detachment and intraocular hemorrhages. In all these cases, the ocular tissue itself acts as a toxin leading to uveitis. Next, coming to exogenous toxins. Here the uveitis is caused because of irritant chemical substances of inorganic animal or vegetable origin. So this completes toxic uveitis. Next, coming to traumatic uveitis. In case of any injury to the eye, it leads to uveitis by three mechanisms. That is, it is because of either direct microbial invasion into the eye, or because of presence of retained intraocular foreign body, or because of any intraocular hemorrhage. So this long-standing intraocular hemorrhage can also act as a foreign body leading to uveitis. And the other major uveitis related to trauma is sympathetic ophthalmitis. Next, coming to idiopathic uveitis. Idiopathic uveitis can be of two types. One which has specific entities like Fuchs' heterochromic iridocyclitis, sympathetic ophthalmitis, and VKH. Non-specific idiopathic uveitis, it is the most common cause of uveitis, which accounts for about more than 25% of the cases. Like all these causes of uveitis where a specific cause cannot be elicited is grouped under non-specific idiopathic uveitis, which is the most common cause. Next, coming to masquerade syndrome. So this is uveal inflammation which is not caused due to immune mediation. So there are two types of masquerade syndrome which are caused by either neoplasms or non-neoplastic. So what comes under non-neoplastic masquerade syndromes are retinitis pigmentosa, retinitis retinal detachment, intraocular foreign bodies, ocular ischemic syndrome, and pigment dispersion syndrome. Next, coming to neoplastic masquerade syndrome. So what are the various neoplasias causing masquerade syndrome? They can be either lymphomas or non-lymphomas. Lymphomas are primary CNS lymphoma and melanomas, as well as Hodgkin lymphomas, leukemias. All these can lead to masquerade syndrome. Next is non-lymphoid neoplastic syndromes. These are retinoblastoma, choroid malignant melanoma, etc. So this completes the clinical classification. One is infective, non-infective, and masquerade syndrome. So we have discussed the various classifications of uveitis. So first is anatomical. Based on anatomical classification, we have classified it into anterior uveitis, intermediate uveitis, and posterior uveitis, as well as panuveitis. Clinical classification is infective, non-infective, and masquerade syndromes. Pathological classification, suppurative, non-suppurative. Again, non-suppurative is classified into granulomatous and non-granulomatous uveitis. Coming to pathology of the uveitis. So we have classified uveitis into suppurative and non-suppurative, and again non-suppurative is divided into granulomatous and non-granulomatous by Woods. So coming to the pathology of suppurative uveitis. So suppurative uveitis is because of exogenous infection caused by pyogenic organisms like staphylococci, streptococci, pneumococci, gonococci, and pseudomonas. So when these gain entry into the eye, there is outpouring of purulent exudates and infiltration by various cells like polymorphonuclear cells, lymphocytes, and epithelioid cells. So all these cells, they gain entry into the uvea. So the whole uveal tissue gets thickened, and in later stages there is necrosis of the uveal tissue. So all the cavities, that is anterior chamber and vitreous, gets filled with pus. So this is seen in conditions like endophthalmitis and panophthalmitis. Next, coming to non-granulomatous uveitis. It is either an acute or chronic exudative inflammation of the uveal tissue caused due to physical or toxic insult to the tissue. It is as a result of different hypersensitivity reactions. So first we'll discuss about the pathological reaction in non-granulomatous uveitis. Here there is marked dilatation and increased permeability of the vessels. So as in any inflammation, the first change in inflammation is the changes in the vessels. There will be marked dilatation and increased permeability of the vessels. Because of the dilatation and increased permeability, there is breakdown of the blood aqueous barrier. So there is outpouring of exudates into the anterior chamber, posterior chamber, as well as vitreous cavities. And the inflammation is usually diffuse. Because of all these reactions, we have the waterlogging of the iris and aqueous cells, flare, keratic precipitates, which I will discuss in later slides. So non-suppurative uveitis, I have said it is classified into granulomatous and non-granulomatous uveitis, and we have discussed about non-granulomatous uveitis. Next, coming to granulomatous uveitis. This is because of invasion of the eye by living organism, and it is chronic inflammation which is of proliferative nature caused by organisms like tubercle bacilli, syphilis, leprosy, brucellosis, as well as virus like CMV. All these can also lead to granulomatous uveitis. Protozoa, helminthic infection, sarcoidosis, sympathetic ophthalmitis, and VKH can also lead to granulomatous uveitis. So what is the pathological reaction granulomatous uveitis? Here there is infiltration with lymphocytes and plasma cells, and these large mononuclear cells, they get aggregated to form giant cells, and these epithelioid cells get aggregated to form nodules. So these nodules are of two types, Koppe's nodules and Busaka's nodules. Similar nodules, they get settled at the back of the cornea, which is called mutton fat keratic precipitates. All these leads to necrosis in the adjacent structure, causing fibrosis and gliosis. So what are the differences between granulomatous and non-granulomatous uveitis? The onset in granulomatous is insidious, so it is a chronic disorder, and in non-granulomatous it is acute onset. Coming to pain, it is minimal in granulomatous, marked in non-granulomatous. Photophobia, it is slight in granulomatous and marked in non-granulomatous. All the signs are less in granulomatous and more in non-granulomatous. But iris nodules, they are present in granulomatous and absent in non-granulomatous. Posterior synechiae, they are thick and broad based in granulomatous, thin and tenuous in non-granulomatous. In fundus, we can see nodular lesions in granulomatous, whereas there is diffuse involvement in non-granulomatous. So we will discuss today about anterior uveitis. So what is anterior uveitis? There is inflammation of the anterior part of the uvea, that is iris and pars plicata part of ciliary body. So what are the various clinical features of uveitis? So what are the main symptoms of uveitis? The first complaint is pain. So pain is characterized by dull, aching or throbbing pain, which is worse at night and over the distribution of the fifth cranial nerve. It is referred to the forehead, skull, malar bone, cheek, as well as teeth. Next main complaint is redness. This is because of hyperemia of the anterior ciliary vessels. This is because of irritation of the vessels caused by toxins. Next complaint is photophobia. That is, patient is intolerant to bright light. Next is lacrimation. There is reflex hyperlacrimation due to irritation of the fifth cranial nerve. The efferent impulses are through seventh nerve. Defective vision. The reasons for defective vision in uveitis are either due to induced myopia because of ciliary spasm, and there is corneal haze as well as aqueous haze. and pupil can be blocked due to exudates. In lens, we can see other complicated cataract or pigment dispersion. The vitreous haze can also be a cause of defective vision. Similarly, macular edema, papillitis, and secondary glaucoma. All these can cause defective vision. So the main complaints of uveitis are pain, redness, photophobia, lacrimation, and defective vision. Next, coming to signs. So what are the signs we examine in the patient when a patient comes with uveitis? So from anterior to posterior, so first we see lid edema, and next comes in the conjunctiva we can see circumcorneal congestion. And there are various corneal signs, anterior chamber signs, iris signs, pupillary signs, and vitreous as well as retinal signs. So first is circumcorneal congestion. Here in this figure you can see circumcorneal congestion. So what is circumcorneal congestion? The congestion of the vessels which are present around the limbus. So here you can see there is increased vascularity of the near the limbus. Next is corneal signs. The various corneal signs are corneal edema, keratic precipitates, and posterior corneal opacity. So what is corneal edema caused due to? It is either due to direct damage to the endothelium because of raised intraocular pressure or because of endothelitis caused due to the toxins released from the microbes. Next is keratic precipitates. So what are these keratic precipitates? These are proteinaceous inflammatory cellular deposits which are present on the back surface of the cornea. What is the back surface of the cornea? That is endothelium. So these get deposited in the inferior part of the cornea in the form of a triangle. This triangle is called Art's triangle. Why do they get deposited in the inferior part? Because of the continuous convectional currents occurring in the aqueous humor in the anterior chamber. So there are various types of keratic precipitates. It can be either fresh keratic precipitates or old keratic precipitates. So in the fresh keratic precipitates, there are three types of keratic precipitates. One is mutton fat capes, and next one is small and medium sized capes. Third one is fine capes. So first we'll deal with mutton fat capes. These are present in granulomatous uveitis and they are composed of epithelioid cells as well as macrophages. How do they appear? They are thick, fleshy, fluffy, lardaceous, and they have greasy or waxy appearance, and they are few in number. So this is a figure showing mutton fat capes. So all these whitish deposits present in the posterior surface of the cornea are keratic precipitates. As you can see, they are very thick and fluffy, greasy or waxy in color. So this is a feature of granulomatous uveitis. So next we'll deal with small and medium sized capes. So these are common in non-granulomatous uveitis and they are composed of lymphocytes. They are in contrast to mutton fat capes. These are small, discrete and multiple in number, and they are dirty white in color. Here you can see these are small capes. You can see small white dots present on the posterior surface, and compared to the mutton fat capes, these are more in number, small in number and discrete in size. Next, coming to fine capes. These are also called stellate capes and it is characterized by total dusting of the posterior surface of the cornea. That is, whole endothelium gets deposited with multiple keratic precipitates, also known as endothelial dusting, and it is a feature of Fuchs heterochromic iridocyclitis or CMV uveitis, that is cytomegalovirus uveitis or hemorrhagic uveitis. Next, coming to old keratic precipitates. The old ones, they are irregular, they shrink in size, they are flatter and they are also pigmented and they have crenated margins. Now here you can see, in contrast to the small capes which we have seen in the earlier images, these are brown in color, pigmented and they have crenated margins and they are irregular and they shrink in size. So that completes the corneal signs. So cornea, we have corneal edema, keratic precipitates and posterior corneal opacity. In long standing cases, you see there is haze in the posterior cornea because of the damage to the endothelium. So next, from anterior to posterior, we have finished lids, conjunctiva and cornea. So next we have anterior chamber. So what is anterior chamber? It is the space between posterior surface of the cornea and the anterior surface of the iris. So in the anterior chamber, what we can see? We see aqueous cells, aqueous flare, hypopyon, hyphema, and we can also note the change in the depth and shape of the anterior chamber as well as change in the angles of the anterior chamber. So what are these aqueous cells? The presence of the cells in the aqueous is due to breakage of the blood aqueous barrier leads to formation of aqueous cells. It is a sign of disease activity and it can be graded using a 2 into 1 mm slit. We have to first dim the illumination of the room we are examining, and we have to make a 2 mm length and 1 mm width slit, and we have to place the slit beam obliquely and examine the place between the cornea and the anterior surface of the iris. Here we can see multiple small cells which are moving suspended in the anterior chamber. So that is called aqueous cells. And we can grade the aqueous cells depending upon their number. When they are 0 to 5, it is graded as traces. When we have 5 to 10, it is graded as 1 plus. 11 to 20, it is graded as 2 plus. 15 to 21 to 50, it is graded as 3 plus. When there are more than 50 cells, it is graded as 4 plus. So here we have placed a slit beam. It is 2 mm length and 1 mm width, and we have to place it obliquely onto the eye, and we have to concentrate in the anterior chamber. So that is, this slit is on the cornea and this slit we see on the lens. So this gap is the anterior chamber. So here you can see small particles which are suspended in the anterior chamber. So this is aqueous cells. Next, coming to aqueous flare. The presence of protein in the anterior chamber is the cause for occurrence of aqueous flare. There is intense scattering of the light because of the protein in the anterior chamber, which occurs due to breakdown of the blood aqueous barrier. This is observed due to Brownian movement or Tyndall phenomenon, and this is more marked in non-granulomatous uveitis. It is graded depending upon the degree of visualization of the iris pattern. So what are the various grades? 0 means there is complete absence of the aqueous flare. 1 plus means it is very faint or barely detectable. 2 plus when it is moderate but the iris and lens details are clear. 3 plus when there is marked flare and the iris lens details are hazily seen. 4 plus when there is extensive flare and the exudate is thick fibrinous in nature and the iris lens details are not visible. So this is Sun classification of aqueous flare. Sun means standardization of uveitis nomenclature. So this is a picture demonstrating aqueous flare. Here we have to place a 1 into 1 mm width beam of the slit and focus in the place between the cornea and the iris. You can see aqueous flare. Next, coming to hypopyon. So what is hypopyon? It is pus in the anterior chamber. Because of outpouring of the exudates, when there is extensive outpouring, they get settled inferiorly. So what are the various types of hypopyon? Dense, thick hypopyon can be present in cases of endophthalmitis or in other CMV uveitis. In all these cases, you see dense, thick hypopyon. Whereas in Behçet's disease, there is a shifting hypopyon, which is very thin and there is less amount of fibrin in this hypopyon. So when we shift the head to one side, the hypopyon gets shifted towards the gravity. Under the influence of gravity, the hypopyon also shifts. So this is called shifting hypopyon or white hypopyon. Next is hyphema. So what does hyphema mean? There is blood in the anterior chamber. It occurs due to hemorrhagic uveitis caused by viral, that is herpes simplex uveitis or herpes zoster uveitis, as well as traumatic uveitis, and in long-standing cases we see neovascularization of the iris. This can also lead to small bleeding and the blood gets collected in the anterior chamber inferiorly, leading to hyphema. So this picture you can see there is pus in the anterior chamber inferiorly. Hypo means inferior or beneath. Pion means pus. So hypopion means pus in the anterior chamber. We have to remember that this is sterile pus and there is no organism in this pus. So next, coming to changes in the angle. So how do we examine the angle of the anterior chamber? By performing gonioscopy. The structures of the angle and gonioscopy methods will be discussed later in glaucoma topic by our HOD sir. And what we observe in the angle in uveitis, we can see cellular deposits present in the angle, or there can be formation of peripheral anterior synechiae. What does peripheral anterior synechiae mean? It is adhesion between the iris and the posterior surface of cornea. Next, what are the changes in the depth of the anterior chamber? The depth can be irregular and deep. The depth can be increased because of formation of posterior synechiae. If the posterior synechiae are annular, that is 360 degrees around the pupil if they are present, then it can lead to funnel shaped anterior chamber. So here you can see this is a figure showing peripheral anterior synechiae, that is adhesion between the iris and cornea. So this one is peripheral anterior synechiae. This is also a picture showing peripheral anterior synechiae. There is attachment between the posterior surface of the cornea and anterior surface of the iris. Next, coming to iris signs. So there is loss of the normal pattern of the iris because of edema and waterlogging of the iris. The normal pattern of the iris is lost. So what is the normal pattern? There are presence of crypts and ridges. So these crypts and ridges will be absent in the uveitis. And there is change in the iris color. The iris becomes more muddy. And next feature is presence of iris nodules. As I have mentioned previously, in the pathology of granulomatous uveitis, there are occurrence of epithelioid cells and Jayne cells which get aggregated into nodules. These aggregations in the iris, based on their location, they are of two types: Koppe's nodules and Busacka's nodules. Next is posterior synechiae. So synechiae anywhere means adhesion between two structures. So posterior synechiae means adhesion between the posterior surface of the iris and lens. Mostly it is lens, but in a post-op case where we have removed the lens and placed a nivoil, it is adhesion between the iris and the IVOL. In case of aphakia, where the lens is absent, it is adhesion between the posterior surface of iris and the anterior vitreous phase. So what are the various types of posterior synechiae? Segmental posterior synechiae, annular posterior synechiae, and total posterior synechiae. I will discuss about Koppe's nodules, Busacka's nodules, and posterior synechiae in the next coming slides. And the other feature we see is neovascularization of the iris, that is called rubiosis iridis. So I have already described iris signs. We see there is waterlogging of the iris, so muddy iris, and in chronic stages atrophy can occur. So we can see hyperpigmented and depigmented areas adjacent, and dilated iris vessels can also be seen. So iris nodules, there are two types: Koppe's and Busacka's nodules. This is an important PG bit for you. Koppe's nodules, here you can see there are nodular aggregations of epithelioid cells and Jayne cells present in the pupillary margin. You can remember Koppe's, P means pupil. Koppe's nodules are present in the pupillary margin. Busacka's nodules, they are present in the collaret. So here you can see a Jayne nodule present in the collaret. Next, coming to posterior synechiae. So I have already said synechiae means adhesion between the iris and the lens. Structures present behind it. So three types of synechiae I have mentioned: segmental, annular, and total posterior synechiae. So what is segmental posterior synechiae? When the posterior synechiae are present in certain quadrants. So here you can see segmental posterior synechiae. Here only at particular quadrants there is adhesion of the iris to the lens, and the remaining part is free. So this is called segmental posterior synechiae. And when we instill dilated drops in this patient, we can see that where there is free iris is free, it gets dilated, and at the point of attachment, there is non-dilatation of the pupil. So it leads to festooned pupil occurrence. And the second type of synechia is annular synechia or 360 degrees. Here there is total 360 degrees attachment of the pupil to the lens. This is also known as seclusio pupillae. So here you can see 360 degrees attachment of the pupil to the lens. So because of this type of attachment, this is known as seclusio pupillae, and normally the aqueous, after getting secreted from the ciliary body, it is released into the posterior chamber, and through the pupil it gains entry into the anterior chamber. But because of formation of seclusio pupillae, what happens? Here the aqueous gets pulled behind this iris. So it pushes the iris forward. That is called iris bombae. So this picture we see iris bombae. Here the central part of the anterior chamber is deep, whereas the peripheral part, because of bowing forward of the iris, it is somewhat shallow. So that is called iris bombae, occurring in annular posterior synechia. And the third type of posterior synechia is total posterior synechia. When there is large outpouring of the exudates between the iris posterior surface and the lens, the iris gets totally plastered to the lens. So that is called total posterior synechia or plastered iris, though it is very rare. Next, coming to pupillary signs, we can see narrow pupil because of the sphincteric irritation due to the toxins, or because of waterlogging and edema of the iris, the pupil does not dilate easily. It leads to dilatation, it leads to narrow pupil or myosed pupil. And the pupil is irregular in shape. As I have already mentioned, in segmental posterior synechia, we see festooned pupil. Next is ectropion pupillae. Because of the exudates present on the anterior surface of the iris, when they contract, it leads to eversion of the pigmentary frill, leading to ectropion uveae. Next is pupillary reaction. So when we put dilated drops, because of the edema of the iris, there is sluggish reaction to the mydriasis, mydriatic drugs. Next is seclusio pupillae, that is annular synechia. The pupil gets adhesion to the lens completely. That is called seclusio pupillae. And occlusio pupillae, when the pupil is completely occluded by exudates. So this is festooned pupil. When we have put, after installation of the dilated drops, you can see these are at the sites of posterior synechia, there is no dilatation. And in the free part, you see dilatation of the pupil. So irregular dilatation of the pupil is called festooned pupil. And next is ectropion uveae. Because of contraction of the exudates, there is eversion of the pigmentary frill. And this is occlusio pupillae. Here you cannot see the pupil is completely occluded by the exudates. Do not get confused between seclusio pupillae and occlusio pupillae. Seclusio pupil, when the pupillary margin gets secluded to the lens, it is called seclusio pupillae. Occlusio pupillae means exudates completely block the pupillary region, that is called occlusio pupillae. Next, coming to the structure, lens. So what are the various signs you see in the lens? The most important one is complicated cataract. And also we can see pigmentation of the anterior capsule, or exudates are present over the surface of the lens. So what is complicated cataract? Complicated cataract is a 2 marks question for you. So you have to learn about this complicated cataract. So complicated cataract means cataract occurring due to secondary diseases in the eye. So it occurs as posterior subcapsular opacity, and the characteristic feature of this complicated cataract is breadcrumb appearance and polychromatic luster. Not only uveitis but other secondary eye diseases like retinitis pigmentosa, RD, all these can also lead to complicated cataract. One of the important causes uveitis. So this is a picture showing complicated cataract. You can see polychromatic luster and breadcrumb appearance. Here in this photo, you can see pigmentation over the lens. When there is pigment dispersion over the lens, it indicates that there was some old attack of uveitis. Next structure is vitreous. So what we see in the vitreous is presence of exudates. And the fibrosis in the vitreous, it can lead to occurrence of tractional retinal detachment. And there can be a presence of cyclitic membrane. That is a membrane caused due to exudate deposition on the posterior surface of the lens. In later stages, there can be destruction of the ciliary body leading to phthisis bulbi. So all these are features of acute uveitis. And what is features of chronic uveitis here? Bilaterality is more common and remissions and relapses are common. The eye may be quite here. There will be no congestion. Anterior chamber cells and flare can vary. Keratic precipitates, we see old keratic precipitates. And in the iris, we see iris atrophy. That is hyperpigmentation, depigmentation areas will be seen. And complicated cataract, band-shaped keratopathy, and in the late stages, as already mentioned, phthisis bulbi can be ensured. So what are the complications of iridocyclitis? If we leave the iridocyclitis without any treatment, so what are the complications we see? As already discussed, we can see complicated cataract. And the other important thing we ensure is, we can come through is secondary glaucoma. In the early stages, it is caused due to hypertensive uveitis. That is, all these inflammatory cells, they get clogged in the trabecular meshwork and drainage of the aqueous humor is hampered. So this can lead to raise in the IOP. And in the late stages, we can see glaucoma, that is called post-inflammatory glaucoma. I'll discuss about post-inflammatory glaucoma in the subsequent slide. And the other complication is cyclitic membrane. I have already discussed that it is a membrane of exudates present in the posterior segment behind the lens, and because of contraction of this cyclitic membrane, it can lead to tractional RD. Choroiditis, retinal complications like cystoid macular edema, macular degenerations, exudative as well as tractional RD, secondary periphlebitis. Other complications are papillitis, that is inflammation of the optic nerve head, band-shaped keratopathy, and late complication is phthisis bulbi. So secondary glaucoma, as already mentioned, early stages, it can be due to hypertensive uveitis. That is, the inflammatory cells that clog the trabecular meshwork, drainage is blocked, leading to raise in the IOP. And in the late stages, because of formation of the posterior synechiae, that is in annular synechiae, formation of the posterior synechiae, there is difficulty drainage of the aqueous humor from the posterior chamber into the anterior chamber, forward bulging of the iris, iris bombae, and this iris bombae, peripheral iris gets pushed to the cornea. So it leads to secondary angle closure glaucoma. Similarly, there can be angle closure glaucoma because of formation of peripheral anterior synechiae. This leads to closure, blockage of the aqueous drainage leading to glaucoma. And this is a picture showing band-shaped keratopathy. Here you can see whitish opacity on the cornea. Next, late complication is phthisis bulbi. So what is this phthisis bulbi? It is a globe which is sightless, shapeless, shrunken, and soft, associated with dystrophic calcification or ossifications, and there is a risk of intraocular malignancy. So this is a picture showing hypotony with phthisis bulbi. So there are three stages of phthisis bulbi. One is atrophic bulbi without shrinkage. Second one is atrophic bulbi with shrinkage. And third one is phthisis bulbi. So what is the treatment of phthisis bulbi? Unless until the patient complains of any pain, we do not treat a case of phthisis bulbi, and enucleation is done if the patient complains of pain. So what are the differential diagnoses of uveitis? So we have to differentiate uveitis from other important causes of red eye. So what are the important causes of red eye? Conjunctivitis and glaucoma. This is also a 4 marks question for you. DDs of acute red eye. So how do you differentiate it from conjunctivitis and glaucoma? The onset here is gradual, whereas in glaucoma is sudden, and the pain, it is mild in conjunctivitis, whereas moderate in iridocyclitis and marked in glaucoma. Discharge is mucopurulent in conjunctivitis, watery in both iridocyclitis as well as glaucoma. Colored halos are present in conjunctivitis and glaucoma, but they are absent in iridocyclitis. How do you differentiate between conjunctivitis colored halos and that due to glaucoma? In conjunctivitis, the colored halos are caused due to presence of discharge. So when the patient goes and washes his eye, when the discharge is removed, there is absence of colored halos. Even after thorough saline irrigation of the eye, if the colored halos persist, it can be due to glaucoma. How do you differentiate between colored halos caused due to cataract and glaucoma? It is Finkam's test that will be discussed in cataract. And how will be the vision? It is good in conjunctivitis, whereas it is impaired in both glaucoma as well as iridocyclitis. Congestion, it is conjunctival congestion in conjunctivitis and circumcorneal congestion in iridocyclitis and glaucoma. Tenderness is absent in conjunctivitis, whereas it is marked in both iridocyclitis and glaucoma. Pupil, it is normal in conjunctivitis, whereas it is small in or myosed in iridocyclitis, and it is large and vertically oval in conjunctive glaucoma. The media, it is clear, and anterior chamber iris, all these are normal in conjunctivitis, whereas in iridocyclitis we have KPs, aqueous flare, cells, and the iris is muddy. IOP is normal. Whereas in glaucoma, the edema of the cornea can lead to hazy media, and the anterior chamber is shallow here, and iris will be edematous. IOP is raised. Aqueous cells and flare are absent in glaucoma. Next, coming to investigation. So, after we have diagnosed a case as uveitis, when a patient comes with red eye, so first we have to keep in mind the other cause of red eye like conjunctivitis and glaucoma, and we have ruled out conjunctivitis and glaucoma. So it is a case of uveitis. So next we have to see what is the cause of uveitis. So how we have to proceed with it? We have to investigate. So in which cases investigation is required and which cases investigation is not required? As I have already mentioned, up to more than 25% of the cases, it is idiopathic and non-specific. So when it is a first attack and it is mild and unilateral, we need not investigate that case. Or we can see a specific uveitis entity. Like we can see that it is a VKH syndrome. When there is associated scoliosis, vitiligo, all this we can keep it under VKH. Similarly, sympathic ophthalmitis. Following trauma, if it occurs, then we can clearly say that it is a sympathic ophthalmitis. In such cases, investigations are not required. And when systemic diagnosis is compatible, like psoriasis, gout, all these features, systemic associations will be seen. So in that cases also, investigation is not required. So when do we investigate a case? When there is recurrent infection, recurrent inflammation, that is recurrent granulomatous anteruveitis, and it is a bilateral disease, and systemic manifestations are present, but we cannot identify it as a specific disease, and confirmation is required for a suspected ocular picture. In all these cases, we have to investigate. So what are investigations we have to do? Hematological investigations like TC, DC, ESR, blood sugar and uric acid levels, serological tests for syphilis, toxoplasmosis and histoplasmosis, and urine examination for pus cells, RBC, and culture to rule out any urinary infections. Stool examinations for cyst and ova to rule out parasitic infections. After hematological and urine tests, we have to do skin tests. So what are the various skin tests? Tuberculin test, pathogen test, and Lepperman test. Tuberculin test is used in tuberculosis. Pathogen test is for Behçet's disease, where there is increased sensitivity to needle prick. Lepperman test is done in leprosy. Radiological test, chest X-ray for sarcoidosis, as well as tuberculosis. Sacroiliac joint exercise, it is used in ankylosing spondylitis. CT and MRI are also required in certain cases. So after proceeding with the investigations, so what are the treatment? So treatment of iridocyclitis is of mainly three modalities. One is non-specific treatment, specific treatment, and treatment of the complications. So first, non-specific treatment. Local, we can give mydriatics, steroids, and broad-spectrum antibiotics. Systemically, we have to administer corticosteroids, NSAIDs, immunosuppressive drugs. So first, coming to local supportive, that is non-specific treatment. Local non-specific treatment, mydriatics. So there are various types of mydriatics: tropicamide, cyclopentolate, phenylephrine, hometropin, and atropine, of which atropine has the most cycloplegic effect. So what is the role of mydriatics in uveitis? They act by relieving the spasm of the ciliary muscle and pupillary sphincter. So they reduce the exudation by decreasing the hyperemia and vascular permeability, and increases blood supply to the anterior uvea. So there will be more amount of antibodies reaching the uvea. So easy clearing of the exudates, and it prevents the formation of posterior synechiae, and also by it is also used to break the already formed posterior synechiae. So the main functions of mydriatics are to relieve the ciliary spasm. By relieving the ciliary spasm, the patient gets relief from photophobia and pain, and it decreases hyperemia. So the exudates will be decreased, and it prevents the formation of posterior synechiae, and also helps in breakage of the already formed posterior synechiae. So what are the various mydriatics you can use? Atropine, cyclopentolate, and hometropin, because these have more cycloplegic effect. So the atropine can be used either in the form of drops or ointment, about 2 to 3 times a day. And when the pupil is well dilated, it is twice a day will be sufficient. We have to use these mydriatics up to 2 weeks after the eye has become quiet. Next important modality of treatment is steroids. These steroids, they can be given locally as well as systemically. Local steroids, they can be administered in the form of drops or periocular injections. So drops, we can use either dexamethasone, prednisolone, betamethasone. So what are the indications for topical steroids? They are used for acute anterior uveitis they act by decreasing the inflammation, and also by decreasing the amount of fibrosis. It has anti-fibrotic nature, so it decreases the amount of fibrosis. So how do you use the steroids? Prednisolone acetate, we have to use 4 to 6 times a day, up to 2 weeks, and then taper depending upon the control of the inflammation. In long-standing cases like chronic anterior uveitis, we have to give long-term steroids. So weaker steroids like loteprednisolone should be attempted, because long-term use of steroids can lead to complications like cataracts and glaucomas. Systemic therapy. Systemic therapy, we have corticosteroids, anti-inflammatory drugs, and immunosuppressive drugs. So what is the indication for systemic steroids? When there is intermediate uveitis which is not responding to subtenon injections. Similarly, anterior as well as posterior uveitis which is bilateral in nature, and it is resistant to topical therapy. So how do we give systemic steroids? We can give either daily therapy or alternate day therapy. Daily therapy, we have to give 60 to 80 mg daily up to 2 weeks, and gradually we have to taper over 6 to 8 weeks. When there is, it is used, daily therapy is used for acute cases of uveitis, whereas alternate day therapy is used in cases where the eye is relatively quiet and the inflammation is lesser. Next is NSAIDs. The drugs such as aspirin should be used where steroids are contraindicated. Phenylbutazone and oxyphenbutazone, they are also potent anti-inflammatory drugs which are useful in treating rheumatoid arthritis associated uveitis. Next, coming to immunosuppressive agents. So what are the indications for immunosuppressive agents? These are used for site-threatening uveitis, which is usually bilateral, non-infectious and reversible, and it has failed to respond to adequate dosage of the steroid therapy. And also in steroid-sparing therapy is used in patients who have side effects due to systemic steroids. And other physical measures are hot fomentation. It is very soothing because it diminishes pain by increasing the amount of circulation and reducing the venous stasis. So more antibodies are bought and the toxins are easily drained away. Hot fermentation can be done either with the help of dry heat or wet heat. And dark goggles, these give a feeling of comfort, especially when used in sunlight by reducing photophobia, lacrimation, blepharospasm. So this is treatment of the uveitis per se. Next, coming to treatment of complications. So what are the complications we have seen? One is glaucoma, another one is complicated cataract and retinal detachment phthisis bulbi. So how do we treat glaucoma? When it is in the acute stages caused due to hypertensive uveitis, that is inflammatory cells clogging the trabecular meshwork. In such cases, there is difficulty in the drainage of the aqueous humor. So we have to give 0.5% timolol maleate twice a day, or drugs like acetazolamide, which is given orally. Systemic acetazolamide 250 mg thrice daily can be given. The drugs which are contraindicated in inflammatory glaucomas are pilocarpine because it causes iritis. Similarly, latanoprast, that is prostaglandin analogs. This also leads to increase in the inflammation. So we have to remember that all anti-glaucoma drugs can't be used in uveitis. Pilocarpine and prostaglandin analog drugs should be not be used in uveitis induced glaucoma. In secondary glaucoma caused due to post-inflammation, that is formation of peripheral anterior synechiae as well as posterior synechiae. We can treat it by doing laser iridotomy or surgical iridectomy. When iridectomy fails, we have to go for trabeculectomy. Next, coming to complicated cataract. So cataract, we have to do lens extraction. But when we must do cataract extraction is an important thing. When the disease is active, we should not do cataract extraction because it can lead to precipitation of the inflammation and flaring of the inflammation can occur. So when there are presence of fresh capies, we should not do intraocular surgeries. We must wait for up to 3 months for inactive disease to perform cataract extraction. So how do you treat retinal detachment? If it is of exudative type, by treating the uveitis, the retinal detachment also gets settled by itself. If there is a tractional detachment, then we have to do vitrectomy. And phthisis bulbi, as I have already mentioned, if it is painful, then we have to remove it by enucleation. So what are the basic modalities of treatment? We can either give treatment topically, that is mainstay of therapy is mydriatics, steroids, and next is systemic steroids, immunosuppressive and NSAIDs, and other physical measures like hot fermentation as well as dark goggles, and treatment of the complication. So today we have dealt with how do we classify uveitis, all the classifications, anatomical, pathological, etiological and clinical classifications, and we have dealt with the anterior uveitis today. So in the anterior uveitis, what are the various clinical features? What are the symptoms? What are the signs? Both anterior to posterior, lid signs, corneal signs, iris signs, lens signs, vitreous signs and retinal signs. So all these we have discussed, and how do you investigate a case of uveitis, and what are the various differential diagnoses of anterior uveitis, and what is the treatment of anterior uveitis. So today we have discussed about all these things, and in the next class we are going to discuss about intermediate uveitis and posterior uveitis. But in the next class I am on leave, so next class will be done by Dr. Sahiti, my colleague. So if you have any doubts, you can ask. I think I'm clear to everyone regarding this topic. If you have any doubts, you are free to ask. So treatment of infective uveitis means like endophthalmitis, all these I'll deal in another topic. And like if it is due to specific diseases like tuberculosis, all these ATT, specific treatment of the infection should be given along with the steroids and mydriatics. Any more doubts? For you, iridocyclitis anti-uveitis is an important essay question, and even 2 marks answers can also come from this. You must be well prepared with the anterior chamber cells, flare, hypopion. All these are also important. Keratic presbyteritis is also a 4-mark question for you. So iridocyclitis is an important topic. If you have any doubts, please. Okay, thank you.